Welcome to today's video. Join me as we explore a surprising story where $2 billion were not spent on charitable or public purposes, but rather invested in about 100 toasters. This is not a non-profit organization, but a royal wedding. Elon Musk, who is sitting in the hot seat, smiles as if he just successfully hacked the Pentagon. The scene was covered by a thick fog, making Washington feel like it was submerged in a gray painting, where not only the gloomy weather prevailed, but also the cold atmosphere of neatly tailored suits, rigid questions, and a space entirely devoid of any moral ambiguity. The hearing room, packed with press and camera crews, added to the growing tension, as if everyone were preparing for a political execution. Let's dive into the secrets behind this massive figure. Join us as we closely follow the latest developments in this case and get ready for some shocking revelations. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments and hit follow so you don't miss any of the exciting stories. The truth is still waiting to be uncovered. Don't miss it. $2 billion for about 100 toasters is not a non-profit organization, but a royal wedding. Elon Musk swears, smiling as if he just hacked the Pentagon. The fog that blanketed PTOAC that morning covered Washington in a gray hue, more of a metaphor than the weather inside the Hart Senate office building. The mood was colder, still with neatly pressed suits, rigid questions, and no room left for moral fog. The hearing room was packed with the press, stacked on top of each other, shoulder to shoulder, camera crews threading cables beneath the high benches of the senators, as if they were nervous. Ants, even marbles, seemed to buzz with a charge in the air like the atmosphere before a political execution. At the center of it all, sitting with the effortless arrogance of a man who has foreseen the end, was Elon Musk. Facing him was a woman whose rise had once been described as meteoric, but now seemed more like a satellite orbiting a costly drift, closely monitored. Stacey Abrams. And presiding over it all, gaunt and full of intent, was Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri. His finger tapped once on the table before the hearing room, a pleased silence following. "This hearing will proceed in an orderly fashion," he said, his voice as cold as steel in the courtroom. He glanced down at the row of witnesses like a man flipping through the last pages of a book he had come to despise. Today, we are addressing the allocation of $2 billion in taxpayer money, which, according to government records and an independent investigation, was transferred to a so-called non-profit with deep ties to Ms. Stacey Abrams. A ripple of murmurs spread through the press group as the name Zong was mentioned. Now, we are not here to discuss slogans. We are here to follow the money. Because when $2 billion vanish into a network of legal fog, political loyalties, and small law firms run by campaign friends, the people have the right to ask if this is just Chapter 1 of Black Lives Matter Part 2. Abrams' lawyer shifted uncomfortably. She didn't flinch, but her eyes narrowed. Musk didn't wait for our first witness. No introduction needed. He was a business mogul, an engineer, a rocket maker, and, according to Twitter, hundreds of times more of a pain in the ass for the government. "Thank you, Senator," Elon Musk said. The floor was his, leaning forward without standing. His tone was very ordinary, but each word was like a software patch for a broken system. "We began reviewing federal disbursement models as part of a general assessment effort, and what we found was not noise, but a payment model with no contract codes, which should have expired." Money flowed into entities with no performance data, and one name kept coming back around like a bad line of code. Abrams shrugged slightly. I'm not saying it's the biggest scam in history, but it's definitely in the top 10, and I build starships for a living." The room chuckled softly. Holly couldn't concentrate. "Well, Mr. Musk?" Musk replied, his eyes locked on Abrams. "This isn't a political issue, it's a numbers issue, and these numbers aren't hiding in the corner." A junior aide hurriedly scribbled notes onto a yellow legal pad somewhere near the back. A reporter whispered, "This will be trending by noon." The hearing had just begun, but the stage was already tilting, and somewhere beneath the surface, $2 billion of taxpayer money awaited either explanation or burial. Elon Musk didn't pose, didn't begin with a flourish. He just looked up, slightly tilting his head as if the entire federal bureaucracy were a confused AI, and started. His voice was so dry it could drain a river. "We decided to clean up a bit. Nothing major. Just gather some federal allocation data to try to understand where taxpayers' money goes after it leaves the Treasury front." He leaned forward just enough to signal that he wasn't joking. "What we found wasn't noise, it was a pattern. A very expensive pattern." The screen behind him flickered. Not a flashy presentation, just rows of raw numbers, dates and amounts. Thousands of payments, column after column, like stolen digital DNA. No contract IDs, no payment codes, no explanations. Just cash moving automatically in a repetitive loop. Senator Hawley's jaw tightened. The committee room shifted in their seats. The Musk continued, his voice steady, even a little intrigued. "We thought maybe it was just a mistake, an administrative error. Someone had entered the wrong code." "Exactly." He raised an eyebrow. "But then, it wasn't just once or twice, but dozens of times, and always within the same ecosystem, a group of suppliers, shell org, and nodes with the same consistent friends." He clicked on the specific case that had caught our attention. "A green non-profit organization officially tagged for community-level equipment grants. Sounds good, right? Clean energy, empowering local communities." He paused for effect, except the contract had been terminated in 2021, and the official project had submitted paperwork closing it down. But the payments, they didn't stop. They kept going month after month, large amounts. A tense beat. You could almost hear the budget bleeding. "And then, we're trying to figure out what that payment is," Musk said, almost narrating like a voiceover in a documentary. "And we found out, all right, that contract should have been closed, but someone forgot to close that contract." A few assistants whispered to each other. A senator looked down at their notebook as if it had betrayed them. Holly spoke in a clipped tone. "Forgot?" Musk smiled, small and sharp. "Of course you forget once it's human. You'll forget 48 times in a row. That's architecture. That's what we in tech call a feature, not a bug." Laughter echoed around the room, restrained, but Musk let it settle. And the money was routed meticulously, the kind of routing you'd expect from someone who understands the system better than those who built it. And every dotted line was accounted for. In the same neighborhood, the fight for justice and its satellites, Elon Musk didn't need to mention her name, everyone understood, and this was the key point, he added, his voice dropping slightly. No one asked for the money to be returned, even though the Treasury sent it out like clockwork and it was never reconciled, never reviewed, never audited, never reclaimed. He leaned back, satisfied. Imagine a vending machine spitting out money when you kick it. Imagine that machine being funded by taxpayers. Holly stared at the screen, then turned back to Musk. This isn't about party lines. It's about whether our government is paying attention. And in this case, it's not. Or worse, someone is paying very close attention to how not to get caught. Senator Hawley clasped her fingers tightly together, rested her elbows on the table, and stared at Musk, who could have cut glass with his gaze. Let's move on to what I think most Americans will care about. Regarding your testimony that nearly $2 billion of public funds were sent to this so-called non-profit organization, can you tell us what American taxpayers actually got from that investment? Musk didn't glance at his notes. He didn't need them, living in his mind. Sure, he said, stretching the word as if he were about to deliver a cruel punchline to a cruel joke. According to official records, this money was allocated for a national program to distribute energy-efficient appliances to low-income households. You know, typically refrigerators, washing machines, things like that. He paused, a slight smile appearing on his face. In reality, they managed to distribute maybe 100. The words hit the room like a wrench dropping in a quiet garage. No gasps. It was quieter than that. It was the silence of a cognitive dissonance short-circuiting in real time. Holly's brow furrowed, but her voice remained cold. $2 billion? 100 devices? Musk nodded indifferently. Each device costs $20 million, unless these things come with pre-installed GPS tracking. Certainly not an impressive return on investment, Musk shrugged lightly. A few snorts escaped from those in the room who knew better than to laugh. Holly remained unmoved. That would make it the most expensive appliance program in human history statistically, Musk continued. Maybe in the history of the galaxy, unless Martians also have woolly sheep. He lazily pointed toward the screen, where a chart was now displaying a timeline of dozens of disbursement payments, continuing long after the contract had ended. And it gets better when you look at the detailed items and see that only a small portion was actually allocated for the distribution of appliances. The rest went to consultant salaries, first-class travel, office spaces that look more like tech startup hubs than community outreach centers. He sighed. They use climate as a smokescreen. OKC wraps it in social justice, labels it equity, and then run it like a hedge fund with tax-exempt status. Clearly, this isn't a program, it's a money transfer protocol disguised as virtue. Holly let the words hang for a moment before emphasizing. And the organization receiving these funds, do they have any direct ties to Ms. Abrams? Musk smiled in a way that wasn't pleasant. They're not tied, Senator. They're connected operationally, ideologically, and financially. You trace the routing numbers, the board members, the law firms, it all circles around the same drain. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice just enough to sharpen it. $2 billion don't just slip into your orbit. That's not a typo, that's the goal. The tension in the room was surgical. And how do you explain the number of devices being fewer than 100? Holly asked, though she knew the answer wasn't as important as the delivery. Musk chuckled softly. Maybe they're storing the rest in a dimension accessible only through grant paperwork. Or maybe... Let me finish. They never had any intention of delivering more. He glanced at Abrams, who sat quietly behind her committee. If this were a toaster, they better speak up. Solar-powered and capable of negotiating international trade deals. Otherwise, someone just bought themselves a very shiny lie. Holly looked back at her notes, then at the numbers on the screen. 2 billion? 100? He exhaled through his nose. We've seen this scenario before. Musk nodded. Similar script, different cover. This isn't about helping the community, it's about helping the cronies. And every time someone asks for a receipt, they're called anti-democratic, anti-science, or worse. He shrugged. Turns out it's a scam. Scams are carbon neutral if you put it on a progressive letterhead for a moment. No one said a word. The sound of taxpayers losing faith wasn't loud. It was as quiet as a refrigerator that doesn't hum because it was never delivered. The door opened, and hundreds of flickers welcomed her like old friends who had grown tired of waiting. Stacey Abrams entered the meeting room with a calm that had been finely honed, her suit sharp, her steps measured, and her expression a masterclass in public neutrality. She knew where she was, and she knew the significance of being here. A few reporters murmured, "She's here in person." One of them mumbled, "Bold move." She sat down behind the witness table, her advisor standing beside her, a nameplate glowing in front of her. Stacey Abrams, former chair of Fair Fight Action. Senator Hawley didn't rush. He let the moment linger, allowing camera lenses to zoom in on the open notebooks. The tension eased like stage lights dimming. Then he spoke, his voice calm but measured. "Ms. Abrams, do you remember serving as chair of the board for an organization called Fair Fight Action?" Abrams didn't blink, her tone professional, the voice of someone who had danced this dance before. "I remember being involved. I did serve as a volunteer for a limited period, but I didn't oversee the daily operations." The corner of Holly's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Not quite," he said, flipping through a file with deliberate care, like a hunter adjusting his scope. "So you're saying you weren't responsible for the operational decisions?" Abrams nodded. "Correct. The executive team handled everything. My role was fundraising advisor, strategic vision." Hawley repeated, "Strategic vision," tapping a document that was neatly spread out in front of him. "Interesting," as he lifted it up, "because according to this IRS 90 record and internal meeting minutes, you weren't just an advisor, but also chair of the board from 2018 to 2021, during which Fair Fight Action spent over $25 million solely on legal fees." He let the number settle before adding, "Half of that was funneled to a small law firm you run, former campaign chair." Abrams adjusted her posture, her lawyer leaning forward, but she raised a hand slightly. "I respect the senator. Those financial decisions were made through advisory and board votes. I didn't personally authorize each transaction." Hawley didn't respond verbally. He didn't need to. He simply asked, "But you didn't oppose them, did you?" A beat passed. Abrams didn't answer immediately, and in that pause, the silence became a statement of its own. If you found this story surprising and captivating, leave a comment with the number 1, and if not, leave a comment with the number 0. Now let's continue exploring this fascinating story. I fulfilled my fiduciary duties as chair. Our expenditures aligned with the legal strategy advised to us. Musk, still seated nearby, muttered loud enough to be heard, "Sounds like someone paid a lot for bad advice." A few chuckles echoed. Hawley didn't acknowledge but didn't refute it either. He leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering. "Ms. Abrams, this committee isn't questioning whether you followed protocol. We're asking whether you knew and whether you led, because a fundraising chair appoints the legal team and presides over the board. They don't disappear when the daily operations go south." Abrams inhaled. The senator was sharp. I support the mission of Fair Fight Action, and we're here to examine whether that mission has been carried out. Her voice remained smooth, but now as sharp as glass. Because at this point, it feels more like fighting to keep the checkbook open than fighting for justice, someone in the press room muttered. Oh. The witness table suddenly felt smaller, and for the first time in the hearing, Abrams looked like someone calculating escape velocity, but with no orbit, only gravity. It wasn't the presence of a crusader, but the presence of a witness. Brittany Gibson entered the courtroom like someone who had been behind the story, not inside it. As soon as her name was called, heads in the press room turned, whispering, following the politician's lead. Isn't she one of them? She sat down at her place. No entourage, no legal team. Just a notebook, a pen, and the weight of what she was about to say. Senator Hawley peered over his glasses. Ms. Gibson, are you the political reporter for Politico? Yes, Senator, she replied calmly. Even I have covered Georgia politics and nonprofit organizations involved in elections for many years. He nodded. And recently, you published a report related to Fair Fight Action's legal expenditures. Yes, I conducted a 6-month investigation into the organization's public financial records and interviewed current and former staff. The findings were significant. Hawley didn't interrupt. He wanted the room to absorb every syllable. Brittany continued. From 2019 to 2020, Fair Fight Action spent over $25 million on legal fees. Most of that money went to a small law firm co-founded by Ms. Abrams' campaign chair, Algra Lawrence Hardy. She paused, not for dramatic effect, but because even she seemed taken aback by the calculation. Meanwhile, Georgia's defense of the same lawsuit had spent over $6 million. Murmurs erupted, with some Democratic members of the committee flipping through their papers, now hoping the numbers had been read wrong. They're not mistaken, Senator Hawley leaned in. So you're saying the plaintiff Ms. Abrams' organization spent 4 times more than the state to settle the lawsuit? Brittany nodded. Yes, and what's notable is that they lost. Hawley let that hang in the air like a flag in the courtroom. And the historical context here is this anomaly. She pulled a thin file from her bag. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund conducted a nationwide review of similar election lawsuits. The highest legal bill previously recorded for a plaintiff was $8.8 million for a multi-year voting rights case in Texas. Most other cases were in the hundreds of thousands. She glanced around the room, not accusatory but firm. Fair Fight Action's legal bill is the most expensive in the history of this kind of work. Hawley tilted his head. And in your report, was there any analysis provided for these legal costs? Any receipts? Any internal documents? Brittany gave a tired half-smile, the kind reporters often wear when they ask the same question 10 different ways and get the same answer. Silence. I asked repeatedly. They refused to provide any details. A senator cleared his throat, clearly annoyed by Abrams's lack of response. Her lawyer, however, quickly scribbled something down, musky from his seat, unable to resist. He said, leaning toward the microphone with a fake, curious tone. Maybe the receipts are with the other 99 toasters. A burst of laughter followed. Even Brittany chuckled, but Hawley didn't laugh. He turned to the witness. Ms. Gibson, as someone who has extensively reported on Democratic politics, did you expect to find what you found? Brittany paused. No, Senator, she admitted honestly. I expected that statement to be stronger than any accusation, because when those who are supposed to stand by you start questioning you, the shield not only cracks, but collapses. Senator Hawley flipped through the file, not because he needed to, but because this moment deserved a breath. Across the room, the cameras focused on a spot where a political strategist began drafting a real-time damage control memo. He looked up, staring at the witness chair. "Ms. Abrams," he began in a voice like calm before the storm. "Do you know someone named Algra Lawrence Hardy?" Abrams nodded. "Yes, she's an old friend." "Furthermore, she's not just," Hawley pressed, his tone as firm as concrete. "She managed your 2018 campaign and once again in 2022. "Yes," Abrams said carefully. "She was the campaign chair both times." Hawley continued tapping his pen on the table in rhythm. "She's also a named partner at the boutique law firm Lawrence & Bundy, correct?" "Correct," Abrams nodded. Hawley raised an eyebrow. "To clarify, your friend, your campaign chair, is also a co-founder of the firm that received over $9 million in legal fees funded through an organization you chaired from a lawsuit you initiated?" A long pause. Abrams didn't respond. "She didn't come to the room," Musk muttered under his breath just loud enough. "That's some friendship. Dividends." Someone in the press pool stifled a laugh. They weren't supposed to do that. Hawley leaned forward, his lawyer instincts now fully alert. "Do you see any conflict there, Ms. Abrams?" Abrams remained calm, but her voice was thinner now, measured by half a breath. "Senator, legal choice." "Representation was made through appropriate board processes. I declined when appropriate," Abrams said, her voice calm. "Does that include refusing to appoint your closest political ally to handle a multi-million-dollar, years-long lawsuit, or refusing to continue as board chair while those funds were dispersed?" Her lawyer shifted beside her. Abrams inhaled. "I did not directly influence the decision." "Interesting," Hawley replied, "because in most ethical frameworks, not influencing the decision to send $9 million to your closest friend's firm while you happen to lead the organization and sign the checks is what we call unbelievable." He didn't yell. He didn't need to. He reached for a copy of the Fair Action Council structure. "Tell me, Ms. Abrams, how many law firms were involved in this case?" She hesitated. 8, Abrams answered. "Exactly," Hawley said, flipping to the next page. "But only one. Only one firm received more than a third of the entire budget, and that firm is run by your campaign chair." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "That's not just coincidence, that's choreography." Abrams looked down, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. Hawley gave the room a moment to breathe. He wasn't rushing. The truth is making its mark. Now, this hearing isn't about undermining a friendship. It's about fiduciary responsibility. When a leader stands at the center of a nonprofit, files a multi-million-dollar lawsuit on behalf of justice, and funnels most of that money to a law firm run by her inner circle, she leaves the rest dangling. Even silence has its price. Senator Hawley didn't speak. He didn't need to, because by now, the truth was big enough. He turned back to Brittany Gibson, opening a new section of the file with near-surgical precision. "Ms. Gibson, let's return to Fair Fight's main mission. Direct voter engagement, correct?" She responded without hesitation. "That's the stated goal. Educating voters, registering voters, particularly in communities of color." And 2020 was a record year for voter turnout, record spending, and unprecedented voter engagement. Did Fair Fight conduct any direct voter contact? Brittany didn't flinch. Senator, according to internal interviews and verification with local voter organizations, Fair Fight did not engage in any direct voter outreach during the 2020 election cycle. The silence hung like a hammer. Somewhere in the back row, a staff member actually muttered the word seriously. Holly leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly, not in surprise, but to silently confirm. "Let me see if I understand this," he said, folding his arms. "You raised more than 61 million more than any other group in Georgia at the time, and you didn't knock on a single door?" Brittany maintained her tone. Even if that's true, pandemic protocols were cited as a reason, but many other organizations implemented phone banking, virtual outreach, and targeted mail campaigns. Fair Fight did not. Musk remained seated, breathing softly, not even a Zoom call. A quiet, bitter laugh spread across the room, involuntary. Holly leaned forward. "So where did the $61 million go?" He didn't ask theatrically. The documents in front of him were color-coded, tabbed, and unforgiving. Legal bills, consultants, staff. He pulled back. "Some of the largest expenses are for the ongoing lawsuit we discussed earlier." He sifted through the file they had lost. Abrams remained still. Her lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but she didn't respond. Brittany shifted slightly in her seat, as though exhausted by the weight of her own objectivity. "I asked the same question during my reporting. There were large expenditures for legal infrastructure, media, but nothing that qualifies as direct voter contact." Holly squinted. "So no ground game, no door-to-door, no phone trees, just strategic slogans and legal records?" Brittany nodded once. "Yes, Senator." He glanced at Abrams. "Ms. Abrams, would you like to comment?" She said nothing, and Holly turned back to the mic. $61 million, and not a single conversation with a voter? He paused, his voice cold as steel. "If this is democracy, what does it look like? It's wearing a three-piece suit and charging by the hour." The cameras didn't blink, but somewhere in the heart of America, a voter was watching, blinking, and realizing the fight hadn't even shown up. Senator Holly remained silent. He didn't need to speak. Instead, he adjusted his glasses and turned a page as though someone was flipping through a well-read script. "We've seen this before," he said. "A grassroots movement, a noble cause, a lofty banner." He paused and then continued. "And then the money shows up." A spark flickered in the room. No names had been mentioned yet, but everyone knew where this was heading. Holly leaned forward. "Remember Black Lives Matter," he said. "Billions of dollars were donated in the name of justice. And then what?" He didn't wait for an answer. Luxury homes, private security, mansions in Malibu, bought with cash, all funded by donations from people who thought they were changing the world. He glanced at Abrams without mentioning her name. "I'm not saying this is the same. I'm saying it seems familiar." A long beat. "Because when you raise $60 million for voting rights, spend $25 million on legal fees, and the rest disappears into consulting costs and executive salaries without affecting a single voter, what exactly are we funding?" His tone now felt less like a Malibu mansion and more like a $9 million check for your law firm, first-class flights, six-figure media consultants writing tweets about saving democracy. He shrugged slightly. "Feels more like a lifestyle than a movement." A Democratic senator in the back row cleared his throat, clearly irritated. "Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, you're lumping together very different organizations and circumstances." He had to interject, not even pretending to wait for permission. "Actually, Senator, it's a fair comparison." Everyone turned their heads, leaning forward, arms on the table, his voice calm and measured. "The same fundraising language. With the same lack of oversight, the same avoidance when questions are raised, the only thing that changes is the slogan on the t-shirt." The room became crowded. This time, Holly continued with the numbers. BLM Global Network raised $90 million. Fair Fight raised over $100 million across its group and nonprofit branches. Both have charismatic leaders, both operate with minimal transparency, and both promise social transformation. Neither has delivered results proportional to the money spent. He looked at the board. "And in both cases, if you question where the money went, you're labeled racist or anti-democratic." Holly's voice nodded, now as cold as the law. "We're not questioning the cause, we're questioning the accounting." He looked back at Abrams, arms crossed. Emotional movements may survive after negative press coverage, but nonprofits operating with taxpayer money shouldn't survive after poor accounting. It doesn't need to be bigger, just right. There are moments in a hearing when words no longer matter, and silence begins to grow louder. This was one of those moments. Senator Holly adjusted his microphone with 2 fingers, never lifting his eyes from the paper in his hand. "Ms. Abrams," he said, "you've stated that your role was limited, that you weren't involved in day-to-day activities, that others handled the funds you've been questioned about. Is it now $2 billion, Ms. Abrams?" A long moment passed before he turned to Musk, almost conversationally. "Mr. Musk, in your experience, do people just overlook numbers like that?" Musk didn't smile. He just shook his head slowly. When $2 billion enters the system, no one forgets that money. It doesn't whisper, it roars. It triggers internal alerts, compliance checks, financial calls light up like Vegas. He leaned slightly toward his microphone. If anyone claims they didn't notice $2 billion, they're lying, or they've reached a level of spiritual detachment. A soft laugh swept across the room, sharp with nervousness, uncomfortable. Abrams didn't respond. Holly kept his tone even, each word now as cautious as stepping stones across a stream. "No one on this committee is accusing you of blatant fraud." He paused long enough to ensure everyone understood he didn't need to elaborate further. "But if there's truly nothing improper, if every expense is transparent, if every contract is fair, if it's all just democracy at work." He looked directly into her eyes. "Then why did your organization refuse to provide a cost breakdown when asked? Why has no one, not the press, not the donors, not this committee, had access to the detailed accounting?" Abrams opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but she didn't repeat it. Silence once again spread through the room. Brittany Gibson was still speaking. Sitting to the side, glancing down at her notebook, the one she had carried for 6 months to report on the proceedings, Brittany didn't seem surprised, just disappointed. Musk spoke more quietly this time. "You didn't lose $2 billion, you directed it." His words heavy like smoke after a controlled burn. Holly leaned back, his fingers intertwined. "And when an organization refuses transparency while claiming to have noble ethics, that's not public service, that's branding," he said. "This isn't an accusation. It's not a blow-up. just a statement with no safe exit. As the flashes of cameras went off and the room sat still in the gravity of the moment, a truth settled over the audience like ash. They weren't trying to prove her guilty. They were proving that no one, not even she, believed she was innocent. The room was silent now, not in shock, not in confusion, just silent in the way a verdict silences a courtroom. The atmosphere didn't feel victorious. It felt like it had been settled. Senator Hawley glanced at the empty lines in his notes. He no longer needed them. He looked up at the room, at the press, the silence now occupying the space where anger had once resided. He spoke slowly, not to create drama but to convey seriousness. No one is above the law, not even those who appear on magazine covers, not even those anointed with hashtags and TV segments. The law doesn't care how poetic your slogan is. He looked directly at Abrams. It just demands the truth on the other side of the table. Stacey sat motionless. Her lawyer had stopped whispering, and finally, there was nothing left to say. Elon Musk tapped his pen lightly once, just once, then leaned into the mic with his familiar tone of half mockery, half sadness, half amusement. You know, I support fighting climate change, but maybe we should start by not burning taxpayer money. Just a thought. The hall chuckled softly, but not loudly. It wasn't playful laughter, it was relieved laughter. Hawley let the moment breathe. Let the record show that while Fair Fight Action raised over $60 million, they didn't contact a single voter while claiming to protect democracy. They couldn't protect their own receipts. And while promising justice, they handed out invoices. He closed his file. This isn't the end, he said, standing up from his chair. This is just the beginning. One by one, the members of the committee stood. Reporters began to whisper. The rhythmic click of camera shutters continued, but what lingered in the room wasn't the flash of lights or the noise, but the sense that something had just been exposed, and no one could pretend they didn't see it. Musk turned to a nearby assistant, half joking. Should we send them a toaster as a parting gift? The assistant blinked, half laughing, half gasping. Better make it a $20 million check, Musk added as he stood off to the side somewhere far from Capitol Hill. A community organizer who had once donated to Fair Fight refreshed their inbox, still waiting for a response, still wondering why the cause they believed in felt so silent, so distant, so formal. Justice doesn't always shout when it arrives. Sometimes it just turns off the mic and lets the silence speak. Thank you for watching today's video. The showdown between Elon Musk, Stacey Abrams, and the hearing is drawing global attention, and the upcoming developments are sure to be just as thrilling. Who do you think will win this battle? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the latest videos. See you in the next one.